hour because of traffic. Snow doesn't really change that too much.
Exactly. So, Frank, if you don't mind, I think we'll just kick it off officially
Sure.
here. And as people sign in, so welcome everybody to Avanti Women's webinar in the month of financial literacy. We're delighted to have Frank Wiginton present. He's an expert. I've had the pleasure of listening to Frank's presentations before, and I hate to tell you, but sometimes when I listen to financial people, my eyes glaze over. But Frank has a way of making everything make sense, make me feel that I could accomplish the tasks that he's setting out for me. So I know you're really going to enjoy this. So he goes from everything from beginners, getting you into it, to a little bit more advanced. And I'll just leave it for him to introduce himself, because some of his credentials I'm not quite sure I would give credit. So over to you, Frank.
All right. Thanks so much, Susie. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. And yeah, let's just spend the next hour learning a little bit more about money and getting a much clearer understanding of how things work. If you do have some questions, by all means, throw them into the chat box there. I'll do my best to answer those questions as we go. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'd really appreciate it if you participate and throw some answers in that chat box as well, because it'll help make it a much better evening for everyone. So let's dive in here a little bit. First off, a little bit about me. My name is Frank Wiginton, and I'm a financial wellness expert and CEO of a company called Employee Financial Wellbeing, and author of the book, How to Eat an Elephant, Achieving Financial Success One Bite at a Time. Now, I don't manage money. I don't sell products. I run an education company, and because of that, we have a different way of approaching how we communicate and teach about money. So I'm hoping you're going to enjoy that. So I've been doing this for about 20 years, providing financial education and advice and delivering education into companies and organizations since 2007. I have 4 designations in personal finance, including the Certified Financial Planners designation, and 2 fellowships, the Fellow of the Canadian Securities Institute and the Fellow of the Financial Planners Standards Council. So if you do have some personal finance questions, happy to answer those for you. And at the end of the webinar, after we've cut the recording, I will hang out for a little bit, and we answer some more questions if you do have those. So if you do have some questions, make sure you get them jotted down or throw them into the chat box, and we'll be sure to get to them. So the first things first, I want to talk about what I call the dream goal exercise. And the idea here is to get you to start thinking forward about your money. So many times when we think about our money and we're thinking about our finances, we're always focusing on, how to pay those bills and how to get to the end of the month and that sort of thing. And really what I want to encourage you to do is to start reaching for something bigger. Start going after something larger. Okay. And when you do that, what's going to end up happening is you're going to start to make these things a reality. Once you start having something bigger to go after, all of a sudden you start changing your behaviors and your habits around what you're doing with your money, because now you have a greater purpose for your money. So let's figure out how we can start to find the money to go out and achieve those goals. All right. But let me start right now. Do me a favor and put into that chat box there the answer to this question. If I was to walk up to you right now and hand you $10,000 cash, what would you do with that money? If I was to walk up to you and just hand you $10,000, what would you do with the money? Anybody care to share? Susie, can I ask you to mute your mic? Yeah, perfect. Spend it. On what? What would you spend it on? Pay a few bills, save a bit. What are you saving for, Paul? You can't take it to your grave with you, so what are you gonna save it for? Travel a bit. I like that. Where are you gonna travel? Personally, I'm working right now and saving enough money. I'm gonna take my girls. I've got 2 daughters and my wife to Costa Rica. So that's one of my big things. But that's probably what I'd be using the money for, is to pay for that trip. Travel, yeah. So this is the thing, is that how you answer that question helps you to determine what your financial priority is. So think about that for a minute, and maybe ask that question of your partners or your family or your kids. Ask them, if I was to give you $10,000 right now, what would you do with it? Because that's going to help them to think about and recognize and realize what they truly want to be using their money for. All right, just a little psychology question there. All right. So my next question to you is, what do you think he's whispering in her ear? What do you think he's whispering in her ear? Keep it clean. All right. Bad things. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question. What do you think the number one secret to financial success is? What do you think? Don't spend. How much money he makes. Is that a shocked because it's a big number? Or is that a shocked because it's a small number? Who knows, right? Right. The number one secret to financial success is actually something that's quite simple. It's knowing how much money you spend and where you spend it. Let me repeat that. The number one secret to financial success is knowing how much money you spend and where you spend it. The reason being is that it's from this decision point in which all financial decisions are made. Are you going to take your money and use it to buy coffees and lunches and expensive cable packages? Or are you going to take that same money and put it towards paying off debt, saving for retirement, or taking that dream vacation? The reason being is that money is finite. If you're spending it over here on things like coffees and lunches, you don't have it to spend over here. Who'd like to be sitting underneath that palm tree? I'm a very passionate sailor. I love sailing. I'd probably sail in on a sailboat and then drop anchor, and I'll swim in, and we can get some of those rum drinks with the little umbrellas in them. Yeah, sound good? Yeah, maybe with extra rum because we're on vacation, right? What did they say? When in the Caribbean, drink rum. Yeah. So the point being here is that when it comes to your finances, you have two levers to pull, right? If you need money to be able to go out and do something, you've got two choices. You can either make more money or spend less money, or a combination of both, right? You do a combination of both, and now you can start to realize and have the money you need to be able to go out and do the things you need to do, or the goals that you want to do. So what we're talking about is understanding our cash flow. Where does all my money go? Now, some people would say, oh, you got to make a budget. I hate budgets. Budgets are horrible. I don't think budgets work at all. And part of the problem is that when you set a budget, you say, I can only spend this much on this thing, right? What's the problem with that? As soon as you have to spend a little bit more, or you've got something new that comes in that you got to spend some money on, you go, oh, it doesn't work. And you just throw it all up and forget about it. No, forget about all that. Focus on just understanding where all your money is going. How much money am I spending and where am I spending it? Because then you can make the decision to say, I'm not going to spend it over here on these things because I want it to put towards whatever your dream goal is. So let's take a look at how we go about doing that. Let me start by asking you this question. How many people here know how much they spend every single month, plus or minus $200? Plus or minus $200. Yeah. Okay. Well, good. So a couple of you do. That's fantastic. Yeah, and if you're spending exactly all of the money that's in your bank account and you know how much you get paid, that doesn't count, okay? The idea here is to really take a minute and go back and reflect on putting together your cash flow. So now there was a workbook that you guys have available to you to download with the registration for this webinar. And in the workbook, there's kind of 5 steps that you can follow on the page there for the cash flow. And in it, basically, the first step is you need to dedicate a bit of time. Given that this is the number one secret to financial success, let's be fair. We're probably going to have to commit a little bit of time to getting this done. And honestly, this is boring. So what I want you to do, maybe break it into 2 sections. Maybe 2 hours one day and 2 hours another day. That should be more than enough to get it done. Get rid of all your distractions, turn off the TV, get the cell phone out of the way. If you have a partner that's a big distraction, get them out of the way. But ideally, they should be helping you with it if you have a partner. Then what I want you to do, put on some of your favorite music. Pour yourself a nice big tall glass of wine. Okay. You got to make this fun somehow, right? It's not fun at all, but given that it's the number one secret to financial success, it's so critical that we do this. Okay. Now, if the numbers start to get a little fuzzy because you're drinking a little too much wine or too much beer or something, maybe pull back on that. Okay. Right. But find a way to lighten it up a little bit, and then keep moving and keep it going. Okay. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to gather up at least 3 months worth of credit card statements and bank statements, because let's face it, almost everything we pay for, we either use a debit or a credit card these days, right? Maybe there's a few things we pay for with cash out of our pocket, but now pretty much everything, even that $2 coffee we're buying, we're using a credit or a debit card or an app, right? So it's all showing up on our credit cards or our debit cards. Some of the banks have a good app too that helps you to sort this stuff out. But download at least 3 months of credit card statements, and debit card statements. Susie, one of the people there saying they didn't get the workbook to download, so maybe you can just pop in there where they can go to get that. So yeah, that's the idea. With those 3 months worth of statements, the reason why I want you to get 3 months is because not everything's going to be charged every single month. Okay, it's going to be things are going to be different month to month. So I want you to capture 3 different months worth of expenses. Okay, so that's the next thing. Now, once you've got 3 months worth of expenses, what I want you to do is I want you to go through the categories that we have in the worksheets there, or just download a household budget spreadsheet from online or something along those lines and make it your own. Go beside every single line item on every single statement. That's what the elephant represents. Write down and make a list of all the different categories. Okay, so beside every line item on every statement, you're going to make a list of the categories. Then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to add up all of those categories and divide by 3 to get your monthly amount. So if you want to, you can go to my website as well at howtoeatanelephant.ca. You can log in and create your own profile, and you can start using the tools that are there. So there's a suite of tools that include how to set your goals and tools for figuring out how much money you're spending and how much money's coming in and how much money's going out and all that kind of good stuff. So there's a tool there called a cash flow tool that you can go in and use, and it's got all the categories. It'll do all the math for you, but you still need to plug in all those numbers. Now, once you've figured out all the monthly amounts for all the different categories, you're going to add them all up and you're going to get your total. And I promise you, if you've never done this before, if you haven't done this in a few years, you're going to get to that total and you're going to look at it and go, I spent how much? It will surprise you how much money you're spending every single month. And that's fine, because now you know how much money you're spending and where you're spending it, and you can now start to make the decisions to change where that money goes. The next part is about the 10% rule to financial success, and I talk about this extensively in my book. You guys may have heard of this concept before, the 10% rule to financial success. Anybody heard of it? Anybody know where it originally came from? There's a very famous author that talked a fair bit about it, The Wealthy Barber, David Chilton. And he said, take 10% of your every pay, and put it away into savings. And over time, you'll amass a large amount of money. So you'll be financially successful. And although that's sound, the problem for a lot of people, especially Canadians, is that we're spending, 10, 20, we're spending, 100, 110, 120% of our income. So what happens if we take 10% of our income away and put it aside for savings is we're just going to increase our overall debt, right? So my 10% rule to financial success is slightly different. It's simply this: reduce all of your expenses by an average of 10%. Now, I'm not talking about becoming a miser. What I'm talking about is simply this. If your household is spending, let's say, $5,000 a month across the board on all expenses, if you can find a way to cut an average of 10% across the board, that's $500 a month. That's going to add up to over $6,000 a year. If I was to walk up to you and hand you $6,000, what are you going to do with it? This is how we start to find the money and have the money to put towards the things that we truly want to be using our money for. Now, some things you can't reduce at all, right? You can't go to your landlord and say, I want to pay 10% less in rent. What does your landlord do, right? They go, they laugh at you, right? Right. So some things you're not going to be able to cut at all, right? If you've got a life insurance policy, you can't go and say, I want to pay 10% less on my life insurance policy. They'll say, well, we'll have to cancel the policy or we'll have to reduce the amount on the policy. It's not really a good situation. Go to the bank and say, I want to cut my mortgage by 10%. They say, sure, no problem. We'll restructure the loan. You'll pay penalties and fees, and we'll extend the amortization. You'll have to pay all this more in interest. That's not really a very good solution either. But there will be other things that you can cut by 20%, 30%, 40%, dare I say 100%. When you start to go through and identify and learn and understand what the different expenses are and like how much money you're spending and where you're spending it, you'll start to recognize and realize, well, why are we spending money on this? And even if it's only a couple of dollars, how many of these small little subscriptions do we have being dinged to our credit cards, right? Netflix for $10 and, Spotify for $10 and a magazine subscription for $2 a month and a website subscription for $3 a month. And all these tiny things begin to add up. And are these the things we really want to be using our money for? If they are, great. If they aren't, then we need to go through and start canceling and closing out and getting rid of some of these costs. Here's one of your biggest budget killers. This is a page in your workbook as well, is pocket money. And so we've got an example there in the workbook that talks a little bit about it. I'm just going to go through the example here, but I like to think of it as a daily spending exercise that really helps to awaken our consciousness to how the little things really do start to add up, and how, these tiny little expenses that we have just, we're unconscious as to how much they really are adding up to. So let's go through a little exercise. All right. So you wake up in the morning, you get yourself ready for bed. Get yourself ready for bed. Can you tell what time of the day it is for me? But you wake yourself up in the morning, get yourself ready to go to work. And so you rush out the door and you grab yourself maybe a coffee or a sandwich and a muffin, maybe at Tim Hortons or McDonald's or something like that. That's going to run you what? About $6, right? And then about 10 o'clock, you go out, you grab yourself another cup of coffee. That's going to run you about $2, unless you go to Starbucks and you get that caramel macchiato, latte, frappe, low fat, no whip, no foam, whatever. Extra hot with 2 extra shots, and then it's like $16, right? So you go get yourself another cup of coffee, that's going to cost you about $2. Then a not so healthy lunch, that's going to run you about $10 or more. Right? And then at 3 p.m., you've been drinking coffee all morning, right? So what happens at 3 p.m.? You start to drift off, right? You start to do one of these. You're working at your computer, whatever it is, and you start to do this. Yeah? Or you ever done one of these? And it's all K's going across your screen, right? Anybody ever done that? Yeah? So what do you do at 3 o'clock? What should you do? You need to get yourself up, you get yourself moving, you go get yourself another snack, maybe an apple, maybe a candy or a chocolate bar or something like that. So you spend another couple of days. And then you kind of pack up at the end of the day and you get yourself ready and you rush home and you're fighting traffic and you finally get home and you're trying to figure out what are you going to do for dinner. So you rip open the fridge and you pull open that drawer and you grab that bag of lettuce and it's ooey and gooey and drippy and you just kind of throw it away, right? Then you reach into the back of the fridge and you grab those leftovers that you hope are still good and you open them up and they practically jump out at you, right? So what do you figure you throw away in leftovers? Let's say in a week. Would you say, maybe $15, $20 worth of leftovers that you throw out? Food that goes out in the compost bin. So if you're doing about $20 a week that you're throwing away in the form of groceries, that's adding up to $4 a day. We're working on a 5-day work week here. Right? The reason why I throw that out there is because leftovers many times could easily make lunches if you do a little meal planning and that kind of thing. So you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone there, right? You can reduce the amount of leftovers you throw out and you can save yourself from buying a lunch. So when we add this all up, we're at $24 a day that we're spending on what? When I asked the question, if I was to hand you $10,000, what would you do with it? Was buy lunch every day the first thing that came to your mind? Probably not, right? It probably wasn't. So if I was to hand you $10,000 now, is that what you're going to do with it? Right? So if we look at this on a weekly total, that's $120 a week. We add that up on an annual basis, that adds up to $6,000 a year that you're spending on what? Is this really what you want to be putting your money towards? So I know it just seems like, oh, it's just $2. But all these tiny little things eat away at the bottom line of your savings. And they really do start to add up and prevent you from doing the things you really want to do. Now, let's go back to reality for a minute. How likely is it you're never going to buy a coffee? You're never going to buy a lunch. You're never going to throw out leftovers. It's highly unlikely, right? But what if you could just do this? What if you could just cut that in half? Well, there's an extra $3,000. You put that with the $6,000 from your 10% savings that we found by going through our cash flow and figuring out our cash flow. We're already at $9,000 of after-tax money that we've managed to find to be able to go out and start doing the things we really, truly want to do. So are you starting to see how, maybe there might be something, maybe there might be a possibility? Maybe I might be able to start getting a little further ahead and going after those bigger goals and those bigger dreams. The interesting thing is once you've got those bigger goals and dreams set, you will start to really focus in on this stuff. So if it's important to you, start by setting those bigger goals and dreams and start going after them. So this is a big one for a lot of people, right? Managing debt. And the one who never has money enough to pay their debts has too much of something else. So in your workbook, I've got the case study of Colin. And I'm just going to grab a sip of water. So Colin recently got a new apartment that was a little out of his price range, but he's going to figure out how he's going to make it happen. But of course, when he moved into this new place, he had to buy a few new furnishings. The next thing you knew, Colin had $24,000 in debt. By the way, 24,000 is the national average of non-mortgage debt or of consumer debt. So he, got a little over his head and it started to bother him. And so he made it his New Year's resolution that he was going to get his financial affairs in order and figure out, how he can start getting rid of that debt. And so we take him through a debt destruction process. So the first step in this case study and Colin's story to destroying his debt is to get the spending under control. So if you're looking to destroy your debt and get rid of your debt once and for all, great. But before you can start working on the debt, you need to work on the spending because you got into debt in the first place because you were spending more than you had, right? That's how you accumulate debt. So that's the first step. You got to get that spending under control because if you don't get that spending under control while you're paying down the debt over here, you're just going to be increasing the debt over here. And when you do that, what ends up happening is you don't benefit, right? You're not really destroying your debt. You're just shifting it. So that's step one. Get your spending under control. Step two is to optimize your debt. So in Colin's story here, he's got 2 credit cards and a line of credit. He's got a little money left over on his line of credit at 6% that he's going to use the money on that line of credit at 6% and max it out. Okay. When he maxes it out, he takes that money at 6% and uses it to pay out the 26% credit card. Okay, and he pays down about $3,000 on that 26% credit card. Then he's got about $1,000 left over on his 19% MasterCard. He's going to take the money borrow the money at 19% off that MasterCard and use it to pay the 26% credit card. So that comes down even more. Now there's only $2,000 remaining on that 26% credit card. So that's called optimizing your debt. What I want you to do is try and get as much of the debt onto as low an interest rate as possible. So any available interest, room that you have on your debt at the lower interest rates, I want you to borrow and max out those to use them to pay down those high interest cards. So now you've got your spending under control, and now you've shrunk how much debt you've had at the really high interest expenses. So once you've got it optimized, next thing you're going to do is you're going to make sure you make minimum payments on all your debts. That's critical to protect your credit rating. Okay, make sure you're getting those minimum payments done. Then what I want you to do is take all the rest of any available funds that you have to pay towards your debt and put them all against that the highest interest debt that you have. Okay, so in Colin's story, he makes minimum payment on the MasterCard and on the line of credit, and then he uses the remainder of the exact same amount of money he was using to pay before to the remainder amount to pay against that high interest Hudson Bay card, and that $2,000 debt gets paid off very quickly. All right, so minimum payments on all your debts, and then any money you have left over, you put against that high interest to get rid of that high interest as soon as you can. All right. So the next thing is you're going to snowball your payments. Okay. Seems interesting. You like that graphic? I worked on it for hours. No, not really. Watch this. You're going to snowball your payments. So what that means is as soon as the highest interest debt is paid off, you're going to take all that money you were paying against that highest interest debt, add it on to the minimum payment you were making on your next highest debt, and then you're going to start paying that debt off very rapidly because you got a lot of money now going towards it, right? The minimum payment you were paying towards it, plus everything you were paying towards that debt you just paid off. And then, of course, once that debt is paid off, you're going to take all of that money and use it and add it to the minimum payment on your next debt, and then you're going to pay that debt off very, very quickly. And so it rapidly pays off your debt. So in Colin's situation, he's paid off his debt 22 months sooner than had he not used this formula at all. He's not using any more money than he was before. He's just paying back his debt differently. That's the only thing he's doing. So we're just giving you a different method to pay it off that's going to have your debt paid off months sooner and save you hundreds, possibly thousands of dollars in interest. So use the snowball payment method, follow that. It's in my book, but it's also in your workbook that you would have downloaded. So hopefully you can apply your debt and follow this method. To make it easier for you, if you go to the website howtoeatanelephant.ca, there is a debt destruction calculator. All you have to do is put your debts into the calculator and just list all the different factors of your debts. And then the calculator is going to take you through the optimization process and the debt destruction process and show you exactly how much you should pay to each one every single month. And it's going to help you to figure that out and do that for you. Okay. Any questions on that before I dive into the next subject? Does anybody have any questions? Don't hesitate to put questions in here. If you do have a question that comes up, by all means, put it into the chat box. Practicing at throwing things out. I like that. Sorry, my chat box wasn't scrolling with me. So, all right. You like chocolate at $3 or chocolate at 3 p.m.? Yeah. A little burst of energy to get the blood sugar flowing again, right? All right. So now I want to talk about the exciting world of taxes. Woo! Yeah, it's very exciting, let me tell you. So, when the first thing I want to share is the fundamental rule of taxation. Now, once you ingrain this rule into your head, it becomes much easier to figure out, am I going to have to pay income taxes on a source of income or not? All right, that's what this is about. So are you ready for it? The fundamental rule of taxation is simply this. The government always gets paid, right? If you can keep that in the back of your mind, it makes it much easier to figure out, if you're going to have to pay tax on something or not. So if you're trying to figure out, I've got this income, am I going to have to pay tax on it? You look at it and say, have I already paid tax on it? No. Well, guess what? The government hasn't been paid, so there's a good chance you probably are going to have to pay tax on that. So if you haven't paid tax on something yet, you will probably have to pay tax on it later. If you have paid tax on it, then you probably won't have to pay tax on it later. And I use the proviso of probably in there. All right. So let me ask this question. Just put your answer in the chat box for me, okay? Just enter what you think the answer to this question is in the chat box. Just put A, B, C, D, E, or F. What is the approximate average tax rate of a person earning $91,000 a year in Ontario? What do you think the average tax rate of a person earning $91,000 a year in Ontario is? We've got a B, some C's. What do you think the average tax rate of a person earning $91,000 a year in Ontario is? Anybody else want to take a guess? The correct answer is D, 23%. So the question asks what the average tax rate of a person is. And the average is 23%. The marginal tax rate is 43%. Okay, so the average tax rate is 23%, but the marginal tax rate is 43%. So most people will ask, okay, so what's the difference? Well, glad you asked. Let's take a look. So what I want you to do, you see this kind of ruler that I've got here? I want you to think of it as kind of a tube. You know those tubes in chemistry class, those really tall cylinders that they had, and you have mixed chemicals in and they bubbled out the top all the time, right? Well, one of those. So what I want you to do is I want you to think that you're pouring your taxable income into this tube. So on the first $12,000 of income, you pay no tax. That's your personal exemption limit. Okay, so from $0 to $12,000, you are in the 0% tax bracket. That means you have a marginal tax rate of 0%. If all you earned was $12,000, your average tax rate would be 0%. You haven't paid any taxes, so of course the average is 0. Now, on income that you earn between $12,000 and $45,000, so that's about $33,000 there, the government says, okay, you have to give us about 20% of that money. So on the income you earn from $12,000 to $45,000, you are in the 20% tax bracket, or you have the marginal tax rate of about 20%. And if you earned exactly $45,000, your average tax rate would be 16%. So if you took all the taxes you paid on the income between $12,000 and $45,000 and averaged it out across all of your income, across the full $45,000, you'd end up with an average tax rate of 16%. Does that make sense? Are people following this? So if you earn between $45,000 and $90,000, you are now in the 30% tax bracket. Okay, or your marginal tax rate is about 30%. If you earned $90,000, you would have an average tax rate of about 23%. So in our example, I used the income amount of $91,000. So they were in the next tax bracket, or the next marginal tax rate of 43%, but their income was about the same as $90,000, so the average was about 23%. All right. So now on the income between 140 and 200,000, if you make that much, you are now in the 48% tax bracket. Good for you. If you earned 140,000, you would have an average of 30% you would pay in taxes. So good for you. And now in 2015, the federal government created a new tax bracket above 200,000 of 53.6%. How kind of them. If any money you make over $200,000, you've got to give more than half to the government. Isn't that kind of them? Yeah. So these are your marginal tax rates, and this is your average tax rate. And I do this to help you to then understand better how the tax system works. So now we can go and learn better how to use things like RRSPs. So let's take a quick look at RRSPs, and then we're going to talk about tax-free savings accounts and understand how these programs really truly work. Okay, so RRSPs stand for Registered Retirement Savings Plans. Did I ever tell you the government is horrible at naming these things? Yes, they're registered. Do you have to use them for retirement? No. Is it a savings plan? No. You don't have an actual plan. So I like to think of these as registered tax deferral accounts. That would be a much better name for them because that's exactly what they are. They are accounts that allow you to defer tax from a high income year to a low income year. Really, I like to think of them as a box. All right. And so think when you go to get an RSP, what you really get is a box, a place that you can put money in and invest it. So there's rules for when you put money into the box. There's rules for when money's in the box. And then there's rules for when you take money out of the box. Let's take a look at some of those rules. First off, the government says you can put up to 18% of your earned income. Now, let me be specific on this. This is your earned income. Rental income doesn't qualify. Business income doesn't qualify. Investment income doesn't qualify. It must be earned income. And that has a specific definition. Now, depending on how much you make, they're going to cap it at $26,230. The other problem is that if you have a pension, it's not a problem, but here's the other thing, is if you have a pension through your work, maybe it's a defined contribution plan, maybe it's a defined benefit pension plan, or maybe it's a group RSP program through your work, that means you've got another box at work that's being invested and holding the money. So the government says, well, whoa, wait a minute, that's not fair. Not everybody gets a box like that. So any money you're putting into that box over there at work, that pension box, we're going to have to reduce how much you can put into your RRSP box. And that's what they call a pension adjustment, or a PA. So you may have seen that on your T4 slip. All right, so that may reduce this limit. Now, when you go to put the money into the box, the government says you don't have to pay any tax on that money. And you're like, yay! But wait, what's the fundamental rule of taxation? The government always gets paid. So what does that mean? That means that if you haven't paid tax on it here, when you go to take it out, you've got to pay your taxes, right? So when you take the money out of that box, you have to include it in your income and pay the taxes. So we're going to look at an example in just a moment. So that's the first rules. Next rule is once you put the money into the box, you can invest it in a whole bunch of different things. You can buy stocks, you can buy bonds, GICs, mutual funds, exchange traded funds, index units. Leave it in a savings account if you want. All right. Buy a bunch of different things. All right. So now that money's in the box, it gets to grow tax, not tax free. It gets to grow tax deferred. Okay, and this is a mistake a lot of people make when it comes to RSPs. The money growth, you don't have to pay tax on the growth year over year. So people are saying, oh, that's tax free. No, it's not. What it means is it gets to grow year over year until you take that money out. All of that growth, when it comes out of the RRSP box, becomes income and you have to pay your tax on it. So it's not tax-free growth, it's tax-deferred growth. All right. Good. So now we have a good understanding of how the RSP box works. So now let's take a look at an example. So the purpose again is to defer money from a high income year to a low income year. Let's take a look at what that might look like. Let's say you're making $60,000 a year. You've got that earned income. You pour that into your taxable income tube here, and it fills all the way up to 30% into the 30% tax bracket. So now you're in your 30% tax bracket, and you decide, you know what? I'm going to find a way to put $10,000 into my RSP. Watch what happens to your taxable income tube when you put the $10,000 in. Okay, you watching closely? All of a sudden, the government says you don't have $60,000 of taxable income. You only have $50,000. So that full $10,000 comes off at your marginal tax rate. or comes off that tax bracket there. All right. Now, what if your business is your income? Well, if you're a sole proprietor, then that then becomes earned income after expenses, right? So after all those expenses, if you're a sole proprietor, if you have an incorporated business, then and all you do is pay yourself dividends out of that corporation, and you don't pay yourself an income, then you don't have earned income and you don't have RSP room. That's why it's usually good to contribute to pay yourself an income out of a corporation. Usually up to, I usually would recommend at least up to the CPP annual maximum amount so that you can qualify for maximum Canada Pension Plan contributions as well and be able to collect that pension in the future. So I hope that answers that question, but ask another one if you can. Sorry, my chat box doesn't scroll with me as I go through the presentation, unfortunately, so I'm a little behind on the chat. Yeah. All right, so now what happened is that full $10,000 came off at 30%, right? So what does that mean? That means that we saved $3,000 in taxes, right? $10,000 at 30%, we would have had to pay the government $3,000 in taxes on that income, but now we've deferred paying tax on that income until we take it out of the RSP. So let's take a look at that now. Now our income declines. Maybe we've lost our job, maybe we've retired, maybe we've started our own business, depending on what it is, right? So now our income's dropped to 20,000. We go, that's not enough money. I can't survive on that. I'm going to take that $10,000 out of my RSP. Okay. Now watch your taxable income tube. The government says if you're going to take that $10,000 out, you have to include it in your income and pay your taxes on it. So the full amount goes up in that taxable income tube at 20%. So the government says, guess what? You got to give us $20,000 as your taxes. And sorry, 20,000, pardon me. No, you take out that $10,000. The government says you have to give us 20% of that $10,000 or $2,000. And you go, okay, fine, because you know that you saved $3,000 when you put it into your RRSP. So the net effect is you come out ahead, total taxes saved of $1,000 in this situation. So this is an example of how, basic example of showing how you put money in during a high income year, you take it out during a low income year, and the effects that it has. That is the purpose of an RRSP. It's not necessarily for retirement savings, although that's a great way to use. That's a great way to save for retirement, right? Because most of us, we're going to have a lower income in retirement than we do in our working years. But, if you are earning $45,000 or less, an RSP may not be of any benefit for you because you may put it in and save 20%, and then in retirement, you may take it out, or whenever your income goes down, you may take it out and be taxed at 20%. You're not benefiting. There's no real benefit, right? So if your income's in those lower tax brackets, you're much better off likely to forego the deferring of your taxes and just save the money in a tax-free savings account. I hope that makes sense. Any questions on RRSPs before I move on to tax-free savings accounts? Has anyone heard it explained that way before? Anybody wish it had been explained that way before? I hope it's a little bit clearer now. Remind you, we've got very limited time to dive into this stuff, but I try to give you a simple example to follow along to get a better understanding. So, if you are going to be, let's say you're a younger person right now, you're just kind of starting out, you've got a lower income, let's say you're making about $35,000, $40,000, don't use your RSPs. Save that RSP contribution room, especially if you think you're going to go and get a better job and have a higher income 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Save up that RSP room for once you are in those higher tax brackets, because then guess what? That $10,000 you put in when you're making $100,000, you're going to save $4,300 in taxes. And then if you take it out when you're in the 20% tax bracket, when your income goes down, now you're going to save over $2,300 in taxes, not just $1,000. Okay. All right. Definitely a lot clearer now. Glad I joined this webinar. Fantastic. I love to hear that. Like I say, I've got a different way of explaining things because, again, I don't have an agenda to promote or sell a product, right? I'm here to educate. So now let's get into tax-free savings accounts, and let me start going through and taking away some of a lot of the misconceptions and hopefully prevent you from making mistakes a lot of Canadians are making. Again, once again, the government is horrible at naming these things. They've called them tax-free savings accounts. So now this is a stat from 2015, mind you, but over 80% of the money that was in tax-free savings accounts was invested in savings accounts. So the government, had they changed this one word, the word savings, to investments, tax-free investing account, had they changed that, maybe people would be using these accounts in a much different way and in a much better way. Because let's face it, what's a savings account paying us nowadays? If we're lucky, we get 1.5%. If we're lucky, and if the banks are competing, right? So again, I like to think of these as a box. Again, it's just a place to invest your money. So when you walk into a financial institution or go to your financial advisor or set up an account online, and you set up a tax-free savings account, you can invest that money in a whole bunch of different things. Okay, but just think of it as a box. It's just a holding place. But again, there's rules for when you put the money into the box, there's rules for when the money's in the box, and there's rules for when the money comes out of the box. Let's take a look at some of those rules. Okay. First off, when you go to put the money into the box, you first have to pay your tax on it. So, what's the fundamental rule of taxation? The government always gets paid. Has the government been paid? Yeah, the government's been paid already. So the beautiful thing is, when we go to take the money out of this box, we don't have to pay any tax on that money. So here's where the real secret and the real magic of these accounts come in. I get so excited about these accounts. I love these things. These are the best investment things I've ever seen. Okay. So the real power of these accounts is what happens between the time when you put the money into the box and the time when you take the money out of the box. And if you can take that money and invest it and have that money grow, all the growth of that money is truly tax-free money. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. So let's take a peek at this for a minute. Let's use a couple of examples. So you take some money and you put it in. Now the government says, yeah, we can't make these too awesome. So we're going to really restrict how much money you can put into these boxes. All right. So they say, here's 5,500 is your annual maximum. Now, provided you were at least 18 years of age in 2009, okay, I don't know how old you guys are, but provided you were at least 18 years of age in 2009, you have accumulated $57,500 worth of room inside your tax-free savings account box if you've never put any money in. Okay? If you weren't 18, what I'll do is I'll show you in the next slide how to figure out how to do that, how to calculate what your max is. All right. So next thing is, Susie, I think your mic just came on again. If you can mute that for me, that'd be great. Yeah. So the next thing is you go to put that money into the box. You can invest it in all the same things like stocks and bonds and mutual funds and GICs. And sure, if you want, put it into savings accounts, but you're really not going to grow your money. The whole goal here is to grow this money because all the growth year over year over year is truly tax free. And then you can take that money out whenever you want and you don't have to pay a penny in tax. So let's try an example out for size. Let's say you put $10,000 into your tax free savings account box and you buy the latest marijuana stock. Okay. And that thing gets high. You like my little joke there? Yeah, marijuana stock gets high. Anyways, and it goes through the roof. All right. And let's say it turns into $1 million. You can take out that entire $1 million out of that box and not have to pay a penny in tax. Isn't that awesome? Now, here's the really cool thing. So I do that, right? And I make this $1 million. And I say, you know what? I'm going to go and buy that 65-foot boat. That's that yacht that I've always wanted, right? I got $1 million now. Let's go and do it. My wife comes along and she reminds me, honey, don't forget, there's maintenance and upkeep and mooring fees. And, you're probably going to have to pay people to help take care of it and all this kind of thing. And I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, you're right. Maybe what I'll do is we'll just charter them or rent them whenever we want now. Can I put that full $1 million back in the box? What do you think? I've taken it out tax free. Can I put the whole $1 million right back in? Anybody have an idea? Yeah, somebody's saying no. The actual answer is yes. You can put the money right back in. It's after tax dollars. The government considers all the money that comes out of those boxes to be after tax dollars. And the beautiful and the power of these tax-free savings account boxes is that when they grow to hold that $1 million, when you take the money out, they say, oh, you're going to take the money out. Okay, we'll sit here and hold at this size for you to be able to now put all that money back in if you want. Now, my recommendation is don't put it all back in the same year. Wait one more year. Yeah, you thought the limit was 57,500. It is, but that's the limit on how much you get to contribute into the box. If you grow the money in the box, when you go to take it out, the box says, oh, I can hold this much now because I've grown this much. Okay, so that's what it's so that's what's happening. So it's really cool how these boxes work. Now, the same is true if you lose money on your investments, though. So let's say you put your full 57,500 into your tax-free savings account box, and you bought that same marijuana stock and it tanked because those things are happening. That's happening too, right? So now that stock goes down and you've only got $10,000 left in the box. Well, guess what? If you take the $10,000 out, your box can only hold $10,000. And to get more room, you have to wait until the next year, and you can put the $10,000 back in, but you can then put in another 5,500. So you could put in 15,500 the next year. So it does work both ways. So if you are losing money on your investments in your tax-free savings account box, I recommend that you don't take the money out, just change how you're investing your money within the box and hopefully get that growing. Because here's the real power of these things is the growth. So many people are using these accounts for short-term investments, and that's not how it works. Let's say that you're getting an average of 7% year in and year out on your investments. And some people will say to me, wow, that would be great. I'd love to get 7%. But let's say you were getting just 7% year in and year out. It will take 10 years to double your money. And the true power of these accounts is the growth. Okay. So if it's going to take 10 years to double your money, let's say, are these short-term investment accounts? No, they're not. They're horrible short-term investment accounts. So I think what they should have called these accounts are long-term tax-free investment accounts, where the LTTFIA, the LTFIA, it doesn't roll off the tongue the same, does it? But that's really how you should be using these, as long-term tax-free investment accounts, and grow that money inside those boxes. Okay, because what I see people doing all the time right now is they take $5,000, they stick it into a tax-free savings account to save for next year's vacation. Great, I'm glad you're saving for next year's vacation, but yeah, and not just sticking it on a credit card. But here's the problem: when you do that, what do most people do? They stick it into a savings account. So now you're earning, call it 1%. Keep the math easy here. Okay, so on $5,000, you're going to earn $50 in interest that's going to be tax-free. Wow, that's great. You made $50 and you didn't have to pay tax on it. Woohoo! Well, if you're in a 30% tax bracket, that means you saved $15 in taxes. Is that life-changing money? Not really. The true power of these is the tax-free growth of the money within. It's about long-term growth investing, and that's how you're supposed to be using these accounts. So they become really, really powerful and effective estate planning tools, because you can name beneficiaries on these accounts. If you name your partner as a successor beneficiary, you can pass the entire box directly to them outside of your estate, and they get the continued tax-free growth of the box. They can't contribute twice as much now. They still have their own personal limit, but they have all the money that was in your box continuing to grow tax-free. All right. So that's a successor beneficiary. If you just name a beneficiary, children, or hey, name me if you want. But no, if you name anyone other than your partner as a beneficiary on the box, then what ends up happening is all the money comes out of the box tax-free and goes directly to them outside of your state, not subject to probate, but they lose the tax-free power of the box. Okay, so your partner, if you have a partner, a common law or married partner, you can name them as a successor beneficiary, and they get to keep the box and the power of the tax-free growth within the box. Or if you name just children as children or somebody else as beneficiary, they get all the money out of the box tax-free, but they no longer have the box helping to grow it tax-free. Okay, so that's the two things on those. The other thing is this is a really great income and tax planning tool, especially for retirement. If you are in a low income, if you're a low income earner, meaning you're earning less than, let's say, $60,000 a year, you're much, much, much better off using a tax-free savings account to save for retirement than you are an RRSP. Because all the money you take out of the tax-free savings account come retirement, you don't have to pay a penny in tax. That means you don't need as much money to be coming out as you do if it was being taxed like it is coming out of an RSP box, right? So that's just something to think about. The other thing too is if you're in retirement and you've got some income, this sort of thing, and all of a sudden, let's say the roof caves in and you need an emergency $20,000 to fix the roof, or something like that, if you took the money out of an RSP, you could send your taxable income into a very high tax bracket, potentially even having your old age security clawed back. If you have money built up and saved in a tax-free savings account, great place to grab that extra money without it increasing your taxable income, without it having an impact on your potential old age security or your old age security clawback. So really powerful planning, income and tax planning tool, especially in retirement. So that's how to use a tax-free savings account, and that's what a tax-free savings account is for. So here is how you arrive at your tax-free savings account contribution limits. In 2009 is when these accounts were created. So if you were 18 in 2009, you started to accumulate tax-free savings accounts room. Okay, and so you got $5,000 plus another $5,000 plus another $5,000 plus another $5,000. Then with an inflation adjustment in 2013, they bumped it up to $5,500. All right. So in 2014, it was 55. Then 2015 was an election year. Does anybody remember what the Conservatives did? They bumped it up to $10,000. It was all over the news, right? And then, of course, the Conservatives lost the election, and the Liberals came back in, and they brought the limit back down to $5,500 for 2016. And then in 2017, it was $5,500. 2018, it was $5,500, giving you a grand total of $57,500. Okay. So that's how you get to the limit. Now, well, I've learned now that in 2019, the new limit's going to be $6,000 for 2019. So that's a good thing. So if you turned 18, let's say in 2015, you would just start adding up from there. So you would say $10,000 for 2015, $5,500 for 2016, $5,500 for 2017, $5,500 for 2018, and you'd arrive at, what is that, $26,500 would be your limit. So if you turned 18 in 2012, you'd start adding from 2012 all the way to 2018, and that would be your contribution limit. So if you did turn 18 long before 2019, then you're at $57,500 if you haven't put any money in. So I hope that kind of explains it. I'm going to hang around and answer some questions. This is my contact information. If you have some personal finance questions you want answered, right there, there's my email address. I'm happy to give you, quick reply via email. My phone number's there too, but frankly, I never have time to answer my phone. So best to send me your questions in an email. I can reply to your emails at midnight and get you your answers that way. But there's my email address, frank@employeefinancialeducation.ca. You can follow me on Twitter at onefrankthought. I'm going to hang out and answer some of the questions here in the chat box. But I really do appreciate you coming out and listening in. I hope that you've all benefited, gotten something out of this for Financial Literacy Month. The goal is, to improve the overall financial wellness and reduce the stress of people when it comes to their finances. So,
yes, and thank you so much, Frank. Sorry, I'm back online here. I think there was a question about at the end about making your kids a successor for beneficiaries. I believe that must be about the
TFSA, yeah, the tax-free savings account, the TFSA, right. Not the TSFA. Yeah, you can make your children regular beneficiaries, but you can't make them successor beneficiaries, unfortunately. Successor beneficiaries is only for a married or common law partner. When it be same sex in Canada, that doesn't make a difference. It's very similar to the rules about rolling over your RSP. If you have a partner or spouse in retirement, you can have your RSPs roll over and be part of your partner's RSPs. And the same thing happens when it comes to a tax-free savings account. So if it is going to go to anybody else, though, they just become regular beneficiaries, and all they get to keep is the money out of the box tax-free, but they don't get to keep the tax sheltering of and the tax-free growth that the box gives them. Now, they can obviously take that money and put it into their own tax-free savings account, provided they have room, but they must have room to then put all that money into their own box. Quick one. Do you recommend we put away the 5% of the taxable income or gross income? Do you recommend we put away 5% of our taxable income or gross income? Well, again, I want you to focus on your goals, and it's about a quality of life. Yeah, it's great to save some money and put some money away. Most of the time, you want to focus on 5% of gross income. The whole 10% rule of financial success, take 10% of your pay and put it away before you spend it, is based on gross pay. And usually it's what people do with it is put it into RSPs. I don't necessarily recommend that. I recommend putting it towards the goals and the dreams and the things you want to achieve. My whole philosophy around retirement is about, living your life now while you can. And if it means that you have to work an extra year or 2 or 3, but in the meantime, you get to go out and do all those things you've always wanted to do, well, to me, that's a better quality of life. I'm more than happy to keep working. I love my job. I'm very passionate about my job. I don't know if that's come across or not. But yeah, so I'm happy to do it. If you hate your job and you just want to get to the finish line and get to retirement, then that's something different. But yeah. 10% is kind of the rule of thumb. 5% is really what you should be doing at a bare minimum. But yeah, 10% of gross income is probably a better rule of thumb to work on. That's provided you're not accumulating debt. Now, here's the thing. If you are part of a pension plan, you're probably already putting away close to 10% of your income. A lot of defined benefit pension plans, so the types of pension plans where you know how much money you can calculate and figure out how much money you'll get at retirement, but you don't know how much is in the pension itself. That's a defined benefit. The benefit is known, not how much is in. Many of those are based upon a 10 or a 12% of gross income contribution. So you're probably already doing that. If you have a defined contribution pension. That's the type of pension where you know how much you're putting in, but you don't necessarily know how much you'll be getting come retirement, because you don't know how much it's going to grow with the investments. Those as well are, many times set up where it's, 5 to 7% of your pay, and then your employer adds in another 5 to 7% on top of that. So you're already saving that 10% through your pension. So you may already be doing it if you have a pension program. If you don't, you need to find a way to do it for yourself. The other thing to think about is if you're contributing into Canada Pension Plan, that's adding up to about 5% of your gross pay as well. So you contribute about 2.5% for easy numbers, and your employer contributes about 2.5%. Now, if you are your employer, if you're self-employed, you get the privilege of paying both the employer side and the employee side, but at least it's 5% of the money going into a pension program to save for your retirement. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Frank. I don't see if there's any more questions coming in, but I know that people will definitely take advantage of getting in touch with you. You
Yeah, absolutely.
answered so many of our questions tonight, and I wanted to let everybody know that I will be I have sent out the workbook to a couple people who didn't receive it, but I will send it again out to everybody who registered for the webinar, and we'll also send you the link to the YouTube, because I think that you can be able to go back and listen to some of the information about especially some of the poorly named RRSP and TFSA. Sometimes you have to think about that, and if you listen to it again and have some questions, I'm sure Frank would be happy to answer them. So Frank, thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Great session. And everybody, thank you so much for attending, and look for the Avanti Women events calendar for future events. Thanks again, Frank.
All
Good
right,
night.
my pleasure, guys.